I honestly was just really stumped on what to make for this week. My creative brain just wasn't really going. I'll be grabbing questions from Facebook and Instagram. Heard that the Garibaldi curler and Cargaler etudes and scale practice is adequate for relearners with previous experience with flute lessons. Any feedback? I agree. The Garibaldi, they are really good etudes that sound like complete pieces. I've actually started to suggest to some of my students to use them as gig music. Oh yeah, that coffee is so good. The curler, I think a bit on the easy side. The Cargaler is really fun if you want sort of like a funky version of Baroque. I personally love the Cargaler. Not everyone does. When you were at college, did you play or try any other instruments, and what did you think of them? I think I got to hold my best friend's bassoon before, and I found it to be, one, magical, two, incredibly overwhelming. How do you deal with people who hear you're a musician, then expect you to act like a trained monkey and want you to perform on command? You play flute? Could you play for my random relations celebration tomorrow? Payment? People charge to play music? I'm going to be really honest and say the way that I've avoided this question is by telling people that I'm a flute teacher. I know that not everyone can use that excuse. I do, because it is actually my main profession. And for some reason, when people hear that I'm a flute teacher, they don't ask me to play gigs. So the way that I used to answer these questions is by going, okay, and then like never responding to them. I feel like now I'm at a point in my life where I don't care enough about what people think of me. So I am more willing to call people out on it. Your answer to them could literally be, dance, monkey, dance. Hopefully they get it. Carrie, this is my best friend. How do you conquer that little voice in your head that stubbornly remains negative when you're approaching a particularly difficult passage or solo? I feel like this is an issue that persists from when you first start an instrument and you think that that voice will go away when you become a professional. And it doesn't. The way that I have been dealing with it, and this is very personal to me, is one, I've been more open about it on this channel. So I've been talking about it, and saying it out loud or even just writing it out the way that you just did is a way to face it. Like, it's a way to acknowledge that it's there. The worst thing that you can do with that little voice is try to ignore it. The more you try to ignore it, the louder it'll be. I realize that it's something that you kind of have to live with as a musician, but you kind of learn to be roommates with it in your head. You let the voice say its thing, and then you're like, okay, now you can go to your corner. The other part of this is that you need to face that passage more regularly. You have to drill that passage a few times every session until your body reads it as a normal thing to do. I've done this with the last page of the Beethoven Ninth Symphony for the piccolo part. It's one of those parts where it's just so excruciatingly demanding that you really have to do it often enough for your body to feel like it's normal. And when you feel like it's normal, your body and your kind of muscle memory, not just in your fingers, but for the rest of your body and your embouchure and stuff, really kind of takes over, which helps you have room in your brain to kind of tell that little voice to sit in the corner. Not to go away, but just sit in the corner. My way of dealing with this is not going to be the same as how everyone else deals with it. And I would love to know how other people deal with it. How to get back into playing when you've had a break or had different priorities, keeping the motivation up. First thing is to forgive yourself. When you're an adult, life is life. Life happens. You don't really have a say in what happens. And sometimes you just don't have time to practice. So for example, this year, I ended up taking off about 9 weeks because first was the week before I got married. Then it was the week after I got married, and then it was my honeymoon, and then I got sick for 6 weeks. 9 weeks total. Couldn't play the flute. Cool. The last thing you want to do is give yourself a huge amount of guilt when you go back into practicing. It's like, oh man, I am not worth playing or practicing the flute because I haven't been back to it. I've been disloyal to the flute. No, you can feel it and then tell that feeling to go sit in the corner. What's done is done. Then what you want to do is set a project schedule for yourself. Be like, for the first month of practicing, I want to do tone. Okay. And you just find like a tone book or something and you just kind of go through the exercises and that's all you do. Then the second month, you can be like, okay, this month I want to get back into technique. So you just kind of like find a bunch of technique exercises. I don't know, like Tafnel, Gobert, all that good stuff. Maybe the next month you'll be like, I want to work on an etude. Okay. So you give yourself big overreaching projects. Within those big overreaching projects, you need to be very practical about how much time you actually have to practice. So I always say, schedule in your practice time. So Sunday night, you look at your schedule for the week. You can plot in not only the start times, but also the end times of your practice schedule. In my experience teaching adult students, I have accidentally started specializing in teaching adult students. All you need is 3 sessions of about 30 minutes to 45 minutes per week, and you will succeed. You will get better. Now, if you're a professional, okay, that's a different story. What I'm doing right now is 1 hour, 5 days a week. I know that doesn't seem like a lot, but I teach a lot. So that is all the time I have. In terms of keeping the motivation up, it's not really motivation. You need to write down everything that you are going to do and follow what you're going to write down, just brainlessly. All your brain work happens in the beginning. The motivation and the inspiration will disappear very quickly. It's sort of your honeymoon phase of coming back to the flute. Once the honeymoon phase is done, you are fully reliant on discipline. And that's where scheduling in your practice sessions will really help. How to deal with performance anxiety. There's 2 parts to this. One is you do kind of have to know your own quirks. What happens to you? Do you get sweaty? Do you get heart palpitations? Do you get short of breath? Do you get dry mouth? Do you get saliva-y mouth? I get saliva-y mouth. And then you have to do things that will directly counteract those quirks. So, for example, for me, I get really sweaty hands. So what I do is I look at my music and I go to see where are there bars of rest where I can wipe myself down. Or because I get a lot of saliva in my mouth, again, I'll look for those bars of rest and swallow. While the saliva is building up, I kind of let it pool in my jowls while I'm playing. So I give myself a lot of room there. Or like if you find that your heart rate goes up like crazy, you can do things like breathe into a brown paper bag because it limits the amount of oxygen going into you. It literally physically helps your heart rate go down. Stuff like that. The third thing is you have to just perform a lot. I call this exposure therapy. It's more so that you have to do it so much that your body reads this type of event as normal. Are you guys seeing a theme here? If your body sees it as normal, you won't freak out as much. Now, I say as much because the anxiety and the nervousness, like performance nervousness, does not actually 100% go away. You just kind of get used to it. That performance anxiety kind of becomes a roommate in your brain, and you kind of like send the roommate off into their room. They're there with you in the house, but they're just kind of in another room. Did I ever play any stringed instruments? I did do guitar a little bit with my class in grade 5, and I was horrible at it. My fingers were literally too small for it. Concerned about the big dark patch on my forehead, I'm just going to say that's just a really strange thing that happened when I used a specific filter on Instagram. So as you can see, everything's fine. But thank you for your concern. I do appreciate it. You guys are really sweet. I really feel like I'm very spoiled. If your music career starts significantly later in life, aside from taking grades, is there any possibility of being able to play professionally or even to teach? What could be a realistic goal? Essentially, you're asking if late bloomers can make it. And I can definitely say yes, late bloomers can absolutely make it. I personally think that it is a myth that you have to start from when you're a kid to make it in the music career. One of my favorite stories is about there was a retired flute repair person. I forget exactly where, but he decided that for fun, he would do a professional audition for his city's orchestra. And this is not a volunteer orchestra or like a community orchestra. This was like legit the professional orchestra in his city. He just practiced and he made it in. I love it. I 100% support you and I believe in you. So go do it. What could be a realistic goal though? I love what you're doing, which you're going through a curriculum. It's a great way to get kind of on paper what your level is. I think your goals are actually realistic. How to embrace music theory, any tips to make it less daunting? Okay, so I just had a conversation with a student about this. You need to treat music theory as if you're learning a new language. I am currently learning Japanese for fun. I'm finding that it's really helping me understand what it takes to learn music theory to a degree where you are recognizing things immediately. It is a language. So what you need to do is read a little lesson every day for like 3 to 5 minutes and then do like 10-minute drilling of some form of sight recognition of something. So it can be interval recognition, clef recognition, note recognition, key signature recognition, any of that kind of stuff. There's lots of apps and websites. I'll link a few in the info box below of my favorite websites for music theory information. The other thing is you want some form of immersion. A great way of immersing yourself into like getting to know your music theory and stuff like that is to join some sort of ensemble. It's as if it's sort of like forcing you to speak out loud in a group setting, and the group just goes, so you have to go with them. It's a great way to get yourself to apply the music theory things that you have learned. From my friend in real life, Chris, I play the guitar and I often play a quick excerpt from a song to ascertain the relative tuning of each string. Is there something analogous for you? The first thing I think of is the concerning Hobbits theme from The Lord of the Rings. I use that on every single flute I play. It's not so much that it gives me an idea of the tuning of the instrument, but more so the feeling of the instrument. Is it resistant in some registers? What's the general tone color like of this flute? It gives me a good gist of how the flute plays. Every flute has its own personality, and that's a really good tester tune for me. I usually do that right after I do harmonics. Harmonics really tell you what the flute wants and does not want. How to work new playing habits into your practice routine. You're working on new posture, embouchure stuff, and it's hard to remember to incorporate it into everything you're playing. Okay. For something like harmonics, you don't have to move your fingers very much. So you can do that in harmonics and in tone exercises. Since you're not moving your fingers very much, this is when you can really focus on like, okay, make sure that your shoulder is relaxed or your embouchure is a certain way, blah, blah, blah. Concentrate on it when you're doing things that don't involve a lot of movement, and do that for at least a few weeks. In those few weeks, ignore it completely in the other stuff that you're playing. It's either that or don't play anything else except for harmonics and tone. This is how I got through my embouchure change. This way, anytime I was playing the flute, I was always doing it the new way. Takes 2 weeks to form a habit. After 2 weeks is when your body starts to kind of remember to play that way for everything else. In the beginning, you'll be really confident in your new way of playing that you'll go and you'll try to play it on everything else, but you'll find that you only last so long before you start reverting kind of halfway back to your old way of playing. It's okay. This is totally normal. You'll notice that half reverting, as you continue to practice your new way of playing, it'll be longer and longer before that reverting happens. Eventually, you'll be able to just play with your new way the whole way. But there is this kind of awkward transition though, and you kind of have to expect it to happen. Playing in a new way magically is not a thing. And this is coming from a person who will change their posture and embouchure completely on every new flute that comes in through my door. I also revert. Do I have my tuner set to just intonation or equal temperament? Just intonation has to be set to a certain key. So if you are going to be setting it to just intonation, or if it defaults to just intonation, that's fine as long as you set it to the key of the piece that you're playing in. Just intonation is actually technically more pure. The ear likes to hear just intonation. Equal temperament is very useful though if you are playing with a piano. It's good to kind of get a gist of how your tuning should sound like with an equal temperament instrument. This is a very complex topic though. Essentially, it's based on the context of what you're playing in. So if you are playing with someone else that is not a piano, you tend to play more in just intonation. If you are playing with a piano, then you will tend to play more in equal temperament. But if you are in harmony with the piano, you kind of adjust your tuning so you sound better to the notes that the piano is playing, which is kind of half just intonation. What's the baseline then? The baseline is just using your ear. You have to listen to the other people that you're playing with more than you listen to yourself. If you do that, you'll blend. If you blend, you will automatically be in some form in tune, whether that is just intonation or equal temperament or somewhere in between. More than likely, you'll be somewhere in between just intonation and equal temperament. That's the reality. Please make a video on embouchure, sideways embouchure, getting faster fingers, coping with nerves, being tired on stage. Okay, so I did talk about nerves. If you're going to push through, you kind of have to have little like goal points. Treat your music as if you're counting down to the end. That's one way of pushing yourself through even though you're tired. That's unfortunate, being tired on stage. Now about embouchure, sideways embouchure. I am working with a student right now on sideways embouchure and we are exploring it together. The need for the sideways embouchure is due to a teardrop lip. So if you have a teardrop lip, you need to basically close one side of your lips and then only have air escaping out of one side. What we found was that you can't apply, what happens inside your mouth as like the airstream just coming out forward like this. It kind of needs to angle out this way or angle out that way depending on which side you've closed. Think about the pathway of the air inside of your mouth before it comes out. It also needs to come out at an angle. What's my opinion on changing the music, making runs easier for students? Do I personally do it or not? I personally do not do it because I love to treat these types of runs as a teaching opportunity. It's a nice challenge to open their eyes as to what they should be capable of playing on the flute, and we explore different ways of practicing that will help them get there. It's a big confidence boost to them once they can get it, and it's also a great way for me to figure out how best they learn. It's sort of a two-way win-win. Changing the music, I wouldn't go as far to do that simply because I feel like it's a missed opportunity. Do I have any advice for someone who's trying to advance the top orchestra band of their school or organization they're a part of by the next school year? Another way of saying this is, what advice would you have for someone who's trying to progress a lot within the span of a school year? Okay, so I had to do this 2 years in a row because I failed my flute performance audition to major in flute performance. I failed it the first time I was getting into music school, and then I failed it a second time, and then I had to take it a third time to actually get in by third year. The truth is, I was not successful in doing it in 1 year. If I had all the tools that I have now, what I would have done is look at what you need to have prepared at the end and then work your way backwards. So if you need to have a certain piece prepared, be like, okay, by this month, I need to have this piece prepared. By this month, I need to have this piece prepared, etc., etc. And then what you can see then is how much time you actually have to prepare all these things. Based on that, you want to schedule in your actual little practice times. And in those little practice times, have a little checklist going of what you need to get done by the end of that week. Work backwards. Okay, this one's a very interesting one. How do you think you've changed as a YouTuber over the years? Are there certain types of videos you'd like to make that you haven't yet? I am currently at a point where I'm changing, and I can feel it. I want to be more creative, but in a different way than I have been. My style of making videos is starting to wear on me a little bit, to be frank. If it's edited, I want it to be more artsy and more expressive. And if it's more long form content where, I get to interview people or I get to talk about pretty serious topics in the music world, I want it to be more podcasty. I find it interesting that you asked this question because I think that's a sign that you guys can actually feel that I'm sort of at the end of a chapter and starting to begin a new chapter of being a YouTuber. I basically want to go into the extremes of what I'm doing now, which is I want my short form content, which is just like anywhere from 5 to 15 minutes long. I want that stuff to be super creative. But that means that if that's going to be super creative and super artsy, it means I need more time for it. On the flip side, I do actually want to do more like long form, like podcasts, interviews, stuff like that. Things that are like an hour long where we're just chatting. Might be nice to do both at the same time. If I'm doing more like long form content where it's just unedited podcasts, then that would give me more time to be more artistic on my short form content. Thank you for asking that question. Have I tried Flight of the Bumblebee? I have. How do you feel about using alternate fingerings in tricky passages? You've read that some people say no, 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 never. I've heard other people say, yeah, for sure, if it makes it easier. What's my take on it? If you want to listen to me practicing the Polepsian dances, it's all up on my Twitch. You can actually follow me figuring out harmonic fingerings that, make it easier. With how fast it's going, it's just way too jumbly to do it with the real fingerings. Why would people say no, 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 never? Is because if you're going slow enough, you will hear the tuning differences. The tuning will be wacky. But if you're going fast enough and if you are playing with enough people, the ear cannot pick up the wackiness of the tuning. So the bottom line is, do you sound in tune? If you don't sound in tune, you gotta use the real fingerings. If you sound in tune because you're going too fast, be my guest. Use alternate fingerings. In the professional music world, we use alternate fingerings all the time for things that are going way too fast. Can you explain what on earth Trevor Y means by yellow tone and purple tone? What I've discovered by teaching it is that I just need to demonstrate it to people. I demonstrate the Concerning Hobbits theme using a very kind of hollow sort of woodsy tone because it is originally played by an Irish flute, I think. And then I go on the flip side and I play the Tumnus's lullaby theme in that kind of reedy sound. What happens is that I get my students to explain back to me what they heard. And what I've noticed is that every single student has explained it differently, which means that everybody hears the same tone color differences, but we all experience it differently. So Trevor Y experiences it as yellow and purple, but you might not. Any tips for beginner piccolo players? You just started playing for your marching band. Two things. One is you actually need to figure out what your piccolo wants out of you. So do lots of harmonics and lots of tone work on the piccolo. I guarantee you it will help you so much. The second thing is to get used to switching between flute and piccolo. Now, you're probably not going to have to switch too much in marching band, but if you play piccolo in your regular wind ensemble band, you will have to switch back and forth. So let's say you have an hour. You want to do 15 minutes of flute, and then 15 minutes of piccolo, 15 minutes of flute, 15 minutes of piccolo. In the beginning, switching back and forth like that every 15 minutes is going to be really like, whoa, it'll take the full 15 minutes to get back to your embouchure, and then you have to switch again. Again, you have to get your body to read that switching as normal. I'm sure that what works for me doesn't necessarily work for everyone, but that's just what has worked for me. We'll talk with some other professional musicians too about this. Will my mom be back in a video anytime soon? I don't know, to be really, really honest. It's just that right now, my filming setup is not very conducive to having guests, as you can see. I'm kind of holding off for now, but I would love for her to come back on. If anything, to kind of discuss what it's like being a mom of a professional musician. Because a lot of you ask, how do I convince my parents to let me be a professional musician? And I think it would be interesting for you guys to know from a parent's perspective what it's like. I think there's a lot of things that even I haven't thought of that my mom is probably holding in her heart. I want to scrape it out. Would you ever consider learning the oboe for fun? You're pretty curious. I don't know, to be honest. I almost kind of want to leave it as a magical thing to me. I will always admire the timbre of an oboe. I don't know if I want to destroy it with me playing into an oboe. I am still not done my coffee. I should probably finish it. It is so good. It is so freaking strong. My goodness, I made it real strong. All right, guys. I love you all very much, and I'll see you guys next week. Bye.
You're making the coffee?
I am making the coffee.
You're making the coffee.
Yes, I am.
Coffee.
Mm-hmm.
Goodbye.
Goodbye. That's totally going into the right at the end.
Wow.